Hello everybody, it's Josie here. I'm going to be doing my FemmeFanTale Readathon wrap-up. So the readathon ran, I think it was from the 8th for a week, and it's hosted by the wonderful Jean at Jean's Bookish Thoughts. I love this readathon because it really focuses on female-written fantasy, and also I think female-led fantasy books as well. So female fantasy authors, but also the actual stories have wonderful women in them. So I read quite a few books. Well, quite a few. I read 4. I ended up reading 4 throughout the week. One of them I actually downloaded on my phone because I was away for a good chunk of the readathon. So I managed to get that one in on my phone as well because my library had it for free as an ebook, which is cool. So anyway, let me take you through the books that I read. So the very first one here is The Queen of Afluria, and this is by Effie Calvin. Now, this is a book that Jean has talked a lot about. Another booktuber that I really love, Boston Reads Books, has talked about this as well. This book it's really cool. So it's set so I sort of see it a little bit as space, but I guess maybe, I mean, is it space? I don't know. It's set like in a fantasy universe where you have these different kingdoms, and our main character, she goes off to Afluria to marry the prince of this kingdom. When she gets there, she finds out that the prince is actually dead. He's died. So instead, it's proposed to her by his parents that she marry his sister. And the cool thing about this universe is that there doesn't seem to be any sort of prejudice in terms of being queer. So obviously the main character is, I would guess, essentially bisexual, if you wanted to kind of label her. And then the central romance in here is a female-female romance. And it's really gorgeous. It's really beautiful. I really like it. So you've got kind of court intrigue, you've got dragons, you've got mages, so you've got a bit of magic going on. You've got this quite complex and slow burn, and I really like this romance between these two main characters, these two women. So the princess and the princess from the other kingdom that's come to get married. I like it. I like that it's also not sort of insta-love and instantaneous. It kind of grows. I think it's great, and I think the fact that this world, this universe, is completely non-prejudice and completely sort of accepting of sexual fluidity. And also another really cool thing about this is that they were talking about the fact that, you know, you've got two girls getting married. How's there going to be an heir, right, to this kingdom? And what they were talking about is that in this kind of universe, you can temporarily change your sex. So there's a discussion here about, you know, sort of temporarily changing into, I guess, male in order to produce an heir, which is really interesting. So I love it. I think this is wonderful, wonderful queer, female-led, female-written fantasy, and I will definitely be reading some more in the series because I think there's 2 or 3 more books in the series. So yeah, highly recommended. This is a 4.5-star read for me. Then the next one is, so from the really good to the is this one here. So this is Sabrosa by Amber Dawn. Now, the idea of this sounded really good. So it sounded like a bit of a dystopian kind of, it was billed as a bit of a feminist novel with sort of subculture in it, subculture elements, and some queerness in it as well, which it is to some degree, but I guess I found it a little bit hard going. So okay, let me try to explain this. So you've got this place called Sabrosa, and it is essentially like a red light district. So you've got like, you know, prostitution houses in this Sabrosa district, and you've got this main character, this girl who kind of gets taken there by a pimp, and she lives with the other girls there. And I think it's meant to be written as sort of, you know, empowering in the sense that she's taken from a life of quite sort of drugs and sort of being on the street to this Sabrosa, but essentially she has been brought there to be a prostitute. So that's something, you know, that you have to keep in mind in this book, and depending on how you see that, you know, either way. And then there's also, so what I did, and then there's kind of like this element of the supernatural that comes into it. And this kind of dark place, so you've got supernatural, you've got like a supernatural element to it, like a fantasy element. You've also got, what I did like was this friendship between the girls, and there's a relationship as well, so there's fluid sexuality in this, and then the way the women do fight and stand up for each other, and I did love that. It was a strange read. I don't even, like, I've got some distance from it now, and I still don't really know how I feel about it. It wasn't bad. It wasn't my favorite thing I've ever read. But it was a bit of a strange one, and I just don't really know how to categorize it or really what my feelings are about this. So I'm not even necessarily going to star rate it. I mean, you know, I could say 3.5, but it's just, it's an odd one. I'm glad I read it because it was a bit strange. I guess it has elements of Westworld in it. I don't know. I just thought it was kind of it was odd in a good way and a bad way at some points, but it was an interesting read. I don't know what else to say. Then, the other two books, so this one that I snuck in, this wasn't on my original TBR, but I got it and I was desperate to read it, and it's The Future of Another Timeline by Annalee Newitz. This was amazing. I loved this. It was so good. So this is one of those books that was recommended off the back of if you like How to Win the Time War. And I get that because you've got queer elements, you've got kind of time travel elements, but I actually think this one's better because if you like a storyline with your kind of the weird, crazy timeline stuff, this one. There's a great, so the premise, and if you like feminist prose, this one. So there's this premise of you've got these two kind of factions waging against each other. So a women's faction and a men's faction, and they're going back and forth across time to change essentially women's rights. So you have this one faction that wants to eradicate women's rights, and then obviously the women's faction, which this book is based on or centers on, and they want to ensure women's rights. And you're kind of traveling like to 2020, you're traveling to the 1800s, you're traveling to the 1990s, which I love, and it is fascinating, it is interesting. It can be a tiny bit confusing, but it's not overly confusing. So I really thought that this did a wonderful job, particularly in a book that jumps timelines and characters and stories, and it really kept me engaged. I adored it. You can see I've tabbed a lot of it. I just loved this book, and this is a 5-star read for me. I'm going to read it again because I loved it so much. I just think it's fantastic. So I think if you did enjoy How to Win the Time War, definitely read this. And if you wanted more of a storyline, definitely read this. And if you want something that's really talking, that is, you know, a sci-fi fantasy novel about time travel, but that's also got some real issues around politics and around gender rights and all of that in it, read this one. It's also got a female romance in it, which is lovely. And just all things wonderful, or actually non-binary queer romance in it, I would say. And it's just great. It's great. 5 stars. Highly recommend this book. And then the last one is so this one I wasn't sure whether or not I was gonna like it. So the book in question is Wilder Girls by Rory Power. Now I was really kind of scared almost to read this because I had seen it, I had loved it. I love the cover of this book, it's so beautiful. I love the colours, everything about it. And I thought I was going to really like the premise. So it was being billed as like a queer female Lord of the Flies, which is something that absolutely appeals to me. But then I saw a lot of reviews come out and people saying that they didn't like it, so I was really scared to read it because I was anticipating it and I'd hyped it. My thoughts, and I actually kind of think I'm in the minority here, is I loved it. I read this book in one day. I flew through it. I really enjoyed reading it. I thought it was interesting. I thought it was an interesting concept. I thought it was, so the central theme is you've got this school, this girls' school, and they're in this sort of isolated island, and they've essentially been quarantined because the girls have gotten sick with this like disease, have been like a contagion, have been affected, and it affects them in weird ways, and it affects them, so this is like body horror in it, it affects them physically. So you've got a girl that kind of has like a scaled hand, you've got a girl whose eye is sort of, one of her eyes is closed and it keeps seeping, another girl who's kind of grown scales. It's so if you can't take kind of gore and body horror, you won't like it. I can. I thought it was fascinating, and I also thought it was fascinating throughout the book when they're kind of studying this contagion. They talk about how it's only affecting girls kind of pre and going through puberty, and that are still, so some of the older teachers it doesn't really affect in the same way. And there's some interesting comments around that as well, and about how, I guess, growing up and how girls are affected and how they're being studied and all of this. I think there's some interesting, again, political undertones actually in the writing, but if you're not interested in that and just from a purely body horror thriller point of view, I loved it. I really, really loved it. I loved the central romance between Reese and Hetty. It is very queer. And there are the two girls, they've got this kind of slow burn love-hate type of thing going on. I kind of liked the slowness of it, really. It kind of made it a bit more creepy, and you weren't entirely sure with what was going on with the quarantine and what was happening and all of this. And then the end, and I know a lot of people hate the end. I like the end. That's what I'm going to say. But I really liked it. This is like a 4.5-star read for me. Yeah, I really like this book. So that's it. So that is my stack for FemmeFanTale. Another great readathon, I think. So thank you to Jean. And yeah, thank you all for watching. Let me know if you've read any of these books, what your thoughts are. Yeah, and I will speak to you all again very soon. Bye-bye.